And I'm a big fan of just playing with one finger at a time and really focusing in on that one finger, because you can play a variety of melodies with just one finger. And then they're really working on that full arm approach. It creates a lovely tone. And so when they're just playing with one finger at a time, they can just, there's less to worry about. There's less of a chance of them developing that tension when they just have to focus on the one finger.
Hey there, I'm Rachel Ehring, and you're listening to the Top Music Piano Podcast. Get inspired as we discuss creative resources, trends in piano pedagogy, ways to grow your income and streamline your studio, and new ways to engage your students each week. If you are a teacher who wants to go beyond the method books to create an innovative studio that fosters lifelong music makers, you've come to the right place. Hello, piano teachers. Happy New Year. I hope that you had a restful holiday break. I definitely did. So I played about 17 performances between December 1st and 24th, plus all the rehearsals and everything for those. So I was so ready for a break. And I actually spent some time on my couch reading for fun, playing tennis with my son, and just doing things at a slower pace, which honestly, I don't often do nearly as much as I should. But it is good to be back in the swing of the new year, and I'm really excited about some of the things I have planned for the podcast in the coming months. The episode that you're going to hear today was actually recorded in December before Christmas. If you are a Top Music super fan, you might remember that we were doing a technique theme during December. And so this episode really should have aired then because it's all about technique, but things didn't come together in time, so you get to enjoy it now. But I think you really are going to enjoy it. I asked Stephanie all of my burning technique questions that I'm thinking about as I'm teaching my students, and she had great answers that were really helpful. So before we get into it, let me tell you a little bit about Stephanie. Dr. Stephanie Archer is an assistant professor of music at the University of Mobile. She holds graduate degrees in music education and piano pedagogy from Louisiana State University and Florida State University. She has been teaching piano to students of all ages for over 15 years and loves helping future teachers grow as educators. Archer enjoys sharing new ideas and teaching strategies in pedagogy. Her research interests include injury prevention, musician wellness, and effective educational practices for beginner students. In addition to her collegiate duties, she maintains an independent studio in Saraland, Alabama. She enjoys teaching students of all ages and abilities. Her lessons are well-rounded, featuring training in reading music, theory, ear training, and technical skills. Her students often win awards in local and state events of the Alabama Music Teachers Association. Here's my interview with Stephanie. Hi, Stephanie. Welcome to the show. I'm really excited to meet you and get to talk with you today. Can you start out by telling us who you are and a little about what you do?
Yeah, so I am a professor, assistant professor at University of Mobile in Alabama, where I teach piano and applied in-class piano and piano pedagogy. And I also have an independent studio here as well.
Great. So this is going to air in January. We're recording in December, but I reached out to you because we were actually in December doing a topic about piano technique, but we weren't able to fit the recording and all the editing and everything in before the new year. But that's okay because technique is an all year round proposition, right? And I guess I want to start out by just saying to our listeners that technique, it's a very personal thing, and there's many, many ways to teach technique. There's not necessarily a right or a wrong. So you can, listen today and take what you need and leave what you don't, I guess. But I would be curious, how did you become interested in piano technique specifically as kind of your area of expertise?
Yeah, so actually, in between my master's and doctorate, I found myself to become an injured pianist, and I developed tendonitis in my arms. And that was a huge, just eye-opening experience for me because, as I think what happens to many musicians, we think we're invincible and I can play anything all day, nothing will hurt me. And then until one day you wake up and you have hurt yourself, and then you have to really reflect on that and figure out how you did that to avoid it happening again, because often musicians injuries aren't some big traumatic event like, oh, I broke my arm, so I know exactly when that happened and how that happened. It can kind of be over a period of time. So for me, I started really reflecting on technique and had to really relearn my technique in order to help myself avoid injury again. And through all that, I really enjoy working with beginner students. And that is really, I like focusing my research on that area. And so just in my own personal experience, reflecting on how I was learning to play the piano when I was younger and all of this, I realized that perhaps there were some gaps in my personal just development, and that contributed later down the road. So I went through an undergraduate and master's degree without these issues. And so having to really relearn this it was shocking at first, but like now in hindsight, I realize how oh, it was kind of inevitable just based on kind of how I was playing and my habits and things. Like it was only a matter of time before I did something that did cause an injury. But fortunately, I have overcome a lot of that. But because of that, I really started diving into how beginners are taught technique and what we can do to set them up well so once they get to those intermediate and advanced stages, they don't have or are less likely to have playing related injury.
Yeah, great. So we're actually going to focus a lot on beginners today. So I'm glad that you brought that up, that you enjoy researching that and that you've worked a lot with beginners. Can you tell us anything about your early piano lessons, maybe that informed you as a teacher today?
Yeah, sure. So what's so funny is I started lessons, but again, when you're a child, do you remember accurately? I was already reading music a little bit because my mother had all her old books and things from when she took lessons, 30 years prior. And I think she just kind of showed me like, oh, this is what this means. This is what this means. And I kind of caught on, and I was playing a little bit prior to starting lessons. So I don't really recall the very first instance of learning, but I do recall my first lessons, and I had a lovely teacher. And then I think I only took from her for perhaps a year or two because I believe she moved. And then I had another teacher who was lovely. They really were just caring and encouraging teachers. And I progressed quickly. I was one of those little sight readers. So I just would read the music and maybe practice other pieces in the book instead of what I was assigned.
That's exactly what I did. Yeah. But hey, it worked out for us, I guess.
Yeah, I did in the end. I think I frustrated my teacher a little bit sometimes with that, but Anyway, but once I was in college and was, studying piano more in depth, especially when I started taking pedagogy classes, I learned all about MTNA and the just different music teachers organizations like Federation and festivals and things. And that was not my experience growing up. My teachers had recitals, but I never did any of the festivals or competitions. And that was actually, I remember feeling like middle school age and into the beginning of high school, just the isolation of being a pianist. And I think for me, and now this is something I try to incorporate in my studio a lot, having those events and things create camaraderie for students. And so that's something I try to incorporate for my students a lot, just for them to have a well-rounded experience.
Yeah, I think that a lot of pianists feel that isolation. So congratulations on making that part of your mission and your studio. All right, so let's dive into some technique. Let's talk about the youngest beginners. I don't know if you teach preschoolers. We teach a few here and there at the conservatory where I am. What are your thoughts about piano technique for those little tiny hands where maybe a 5-finger position isn't even appropriate? I don't want to put words in your mouth, so I'll let you tell us what you think about those little tiny hands.
Yeah, so that is a debate because, sometimes you see floating around on the internet people like the x-ray of little hands and how their bones are developing and that sort of thing. I love teaching preschoolers actually. I'm not teaching any like right now in my studio, but I've had great success with students who are about 4 years old starting lessons. And in my previous position, I had some that I started that age and I was there for 6 years. So I taught them, 5, 6 years. But with little ones like that, and even with a little bit older, I advocate for that delayed 5 finger position because a lot of tension can develop there if we're not careful. And especially with those little ones, their hands are still developing. I would agree that I don't think the 5 finger is necessarily the most appropriate for them. And I'm a big fan of just playing with one finger at a time and really focusing in on that one finger because you can play a variety of melodies with just one finger and then they're really working on that full arm approach. It creates a lovely tone. And so when they're just playing with one finger at a time, they can just there's less to worry about. There's less of a chance of them developing that tension when they just have to focus on the one finger.
Yeah. Do you have any tips for getting students to do the one finger with a nice relaxed hand rather than just a pokey pointer finger on the piano?
Yeah. So I like to start with either 2 or 3. I kind of go back and forth on which one I like best. But both of those are the most stable. And 3 is obviously a little bit longer, so it can reach the piano first. But you can have them put their thumb behind the finger and have a fist. And I know this is a podcast, so I'm showing my hand.
Right. Yeah. That's okay.
And then really encouraging them to use that full arm approach. I like to use a lot of imagery, like it's kind of like being underwater, or, like your arm's an octopus or whatever the imagery is that works for them. And I'm a big proponent of like being hands-on, especially with the little children. If you just communicate to the parents and then like, okay, this is how we're going to learn to play the piano, it's usually not a big deal. But then if they can feel your hands, how your hand is playing the piano, and you can help gently guide them, they usually catch on pretty well. And especially if their parents are involved, then you can teach their parent how to monitor that.
Yeah, because it's really helpful if they're carrying those habits to their home piano, right? Yeah. So then how long, if a student starts at around age 4, how long would they be doing that one finger technique?
I think it really varies from student to student. It depends on how quickly they're able to grasp playing with that healthy technique. So doing, maybe say you start with finger 2 and then you add finger 3 so that, if they're playing Mary Had a Little Lamb, they practice it one time with finger 2 and they practice it another time with finger 3 and so on. And then adding 4, and then you could again, Mary Had a Little Lamb. You can play it with just 3 pitches. You could play it with those 3 fingers. So you're just gradually adding. If a student really catches on, you could do almost one finger a week. But sometimes they might need more reinforcement there. And, it's very personal because some students will practice a lot and some won't. And some of their parents will be very involved and some won't. And so we just kind of have to take it on a case by case basis. But I would say probably depending again on the younger they are, it would take longer. So like the older, so say if I'm doing like a 7-year-old, I would expect them to be doing 5-finger position probably within 6 months. But
okay, that makes me feel a little better because I had a student, well, I still teach him. It took him years. Like we started when he had just turned 4 and he was teeny tiny. And he just, it was one finger for so long. And he's finally made the turn and doing 5 fingers. And I feel a little bad about it, but I think he just wasn't ready. Have you seen that where they can't do the open hand or the 5 fingers for a while?
Sure. Yeah, I've had that. I have a student right now that I'm teaching, and she's kind of been back and forth. She's had a couple hiccups along the way where we've maybe had to take a little break and then she comes back. And anyway, so I just the other day I was thinking like, wow, I feel like we should have gotten a little further by now. And she really wants to play like five finger, like she'll do, especially if I do like improvisation activities with her, she totally is trying to imitate, playing She Is Seen. And I'm like, don't do that. But so I'm really trying to help her focus on, because I delay legato too with that, because that can create tension. And she just really wants to play with all her fingers legato. And I'm like, if you just practice how I said, we'll get there.
Yeah. Yeah. So talk about the non-legato technique that you use.
Yeah, so I just really that full kind of a rich tone, more portato. We don't, that is the technical term for it. We don't really see that a lot, I guess, in the method books, but that's really what that term is. And so just not staccato, but just depressing the key and release, depress the key and release. And then, because really if you're doing this full arm approach, then it's easy to add in legato, because if you do, say, a 2-note slur, it's the same motion in the arm. It's just connecting. It's just your fingers are moving slightly different. So that is kind of how I go about it.
Okay. What are some mistakes that you see teachers making with their beginners in terms of technique?
Definitely that use of arm weight. And that is something like I'm sure somebody said something about arm weight to me along the way. I'm not saying that no one ever said anything to me about it, but for me, it was really kind of an epiphany as a younger teacher when I heard some people talking about arm weight in like pedagogical circles, and I started reflecting on it, and I thought, I don't think I do this with my students. And then once I injured my arms, I thought, maybe I'm not utilizing my arm weight well myself. We have such this emphasis on reading, and reading is important. Absolutely. We want students to be good readers, but sometimes we just focus on getting the right finger number or that kind of thing. And maybe, articulation gets thrown in there, or let's sit up straight or something like that. But then they just kind of the students are playing with their fingers, and the rest of the playing mechanism is kind of detached from that. And, you can get by that way for a little while, but it's not going to work out in the long run.
Yeah. I mean, that's a pretty common misconception that pianists play the piano with their fingers, right? That's kind of how we talk about it and think about it.
Top Music Pro enables you to be a pro in your own studio, because you don't have to reinvent the wheel and you don't have to make up all the answers yourself. You have support.
I think of Top Music as the pot of gold at the end of a rainbow. This site is the whole pot of gold, and there's gold pieces in there that I didn't even know existed.
I am actually teaching a full studio. They're coming online from miles away, so I am certainly thriving.
So what Tim has done is build a global community of piano teachers who are interested, who are engaged. And when you become part of this community, you feel empowered.
My life is different now because I'm not just in an isolated little studio. I have learnt that there are other people out there going through very similar learning curves and sharing these ideas.
I've really gained a lot of skill sets where my teaching is far more creative, far more innovative. I have resources so that I can add to it things that I didn't know.
My life and my business are different now because I have the three things that I really wanted: less stress, more money, and more time.
It's going to be fun. Like, I got excited about being a piano teacher. It's revolutionized everything that I do.
I think I've become a more thoughtful teacher, a more organized teacher. The quality of my teaching has deepened.
I feel like I can do this. I feel a sense of hope. I love the creativity it fosters and the openness to thinking outside the box, and it's energizing.
Joining Top Music really solidified that. Like, no, this is your career, and you can make a career out of this. That has really helped me be proud of what I do.
It's made such a tremendous impact on the way I think about teaching. It keeps your mind open when you have so many ideas.
My best win from being on Top Music Pro is just having a lot more peace of mind as a teacher and as a business owner. It just gives me that less amount of hours that I have to do with research and everything.
It's a really good place to spend a few pounds, a few bucks a month. What you get from it far outweighs what you have to pay into it.
My biggest win with Top Music Pro was increased student retention and increased income. I have a lot more confidence in how I'm teaching, and I have the resources that I need when I do have questions.
I probably went from about 35 students to maybe like 65. I ended up doing 3 classes and I had a waiting list.
If I hadn't signed up with Top Music Pro, I probably wouldn't have realized that teaching piano is a real job and you can build your whole career around it.
So what kind of imagery do you use around the arm weight? Because I'm assuming you're probably not telling 7-year-olds to use arm weight. Maybe you are, but how do you communicate that to the young ones?
Well, I usually take it away from the piano at first, and I do kind of a dead weight activity where you just lift your arm and then drop it by your side. And that is step 1, because some students, and that's not even just little students, like even actually adults have a really hard time with this sometimes. If they can't release that arm fully dead weight, then you have to get them able to just completely release there. So usually I'll, we'll pretend, oh, you don't have any bones in your arm, or make your arm really heavy, or whatever works for them, and they'll drop it. And I also make sure their shoulder's engaged in that too, because the lower arm can be released, but the shoulder can still be really tight. And so I'll like move their arm around and I'm going to make it fall. Don't let, I'm going to surprise you, but I let them do it to me too. So we kind of make it like a little game. And once they can do that, then take it to the piano and we just depress the keys, like, oh, let your arm feel really heavy. I like to relate it to being underwater because I feel like the resistance you feel underwater is similar. And so especially if you have students that, like where I live, people spend a lot of time in the ocean and the pools. So
me too. I'm in California. So
yeah, students do, can relate to that. And then kind of going from there. Because sometimes students come up with their own imagery too. And I usually like to go with that. Like if they have an idea and just let it, whatever relates to them personally, I like to do.
We're going to come back to the younger students, but since you mentioned adults, I want to ask you, because I have an adult student who is a beginner. I mean, she's moving along now, but I feel like they tend to have more tension than anybody because they're like thinking so hard and so hard on themselves. Do you have advice for adult students in this area?
Yeah. So I have found that too, adults just being so tense. And I feel like a lot of the activities that you do with children can apply to adults, you don't have to use such like childish imagery or, it might go at a different pace, but like the shoulder, like one activity I'll do is just stand. And I got this actually from taking yoga, but just kind of spin your upper part of your body and let your arms kind of just like dangle at your sides. And again, it's your arms should be really detached. I always do this one in class piano. So with college students, and even the college students, some of them are so stiff. And I'm like, okay, step 1, we're going to loosen you up. And so adults, and you have to be a little bit, I think, more patient in general with adults because some of them are very apprehensive they're just very self-conscious about things. And especially playing the piano, they have it set in their head, like this is how playing the piano works. And usually it's not how I think of playing the piano at all. And so just helping them feel like reminding them to be released. And even like, so I'm a big fan of yoga or other, movement exercises that help with that. And so sometimes I'll even ask, adult students, like, have you ever tried this? Maybe you should try it out just at home, with YouTube videos or something. This will help you because that's just going to help them in their daily life. If they're stiff playing the piano, they're probably stiff doing other activities.
True. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to try the twist one with my student and see how that goes. Okay, so back to the young ones. Is there a method book that you think does a good job of setting students up for good technique?
Yeah. So I think a lot of the method books do have valuable activities and ideas, and a lot of them are talking about the same thing. It just kind of depends on how they approach it. Personally, I like Piano Safari the best when it comes. I think they integrate technique really well into their method. I will say though, the more I've been teaching and kind of diving into this, I feel like I have kind of almost developed sort of my own approach to technique, and so I'm like grasping from different people, like I like the imagery here or this. And so I think what's best is to monitor your student, because some students grasp onto something and then they're ready for the next activity, so you don't have to really like wait for the method book to introduce it. So kind of monitoring that, and yeah, just figuring out which one works best. I do love anytime there's imagery. So like in Piano Safari, they talk about that tall giraffe, like petting the giraffe. And I use that one a lot. I have a little giraffe. I was like, oh, let's pet the giraffe. And most of the students, the little ones, get so excited, to have the giraffe come.
Oh, totally. Tim Topham, who has the sister podcast to this one, interviewed Catherine Fisher recently, and I listened to it. And she was talking about how important the technique was when they were writing the method and how incorporating that. She talked about the tall giraffe and stuff. So listeners can go check out that episode if they want to hear more about Piano Safari. Thanks for tying it all back in.
You're welcome.
Talk about curved fingers. I mean, maybe I'm aging myself, but I was taught curved fingers from the beginning. How do you feel about using that language? Is there a different language that you use around that?
Yeah, so I think we just have to I actually think we need to be careful with curved fingers, because curved can often turn into like more of a claw hand. And again, I feel like everything I talk about with technique, it comes back to releasing unnecessary tension. Like, are we creating unnecessary tension in the body? And should we be creating that tension? Because I forget who it was who I first saw give this example. I've seen a couple different people give it. But when we move our fingers really curved as opposed to a little more straight, it's much easier to move them from that main hand bridge a little straighter. So I like to say maybe like firm fingertips or just engaged knuckles. That's a little bit probably more advanced language than a child can handle, but just making sure that they don't collapse. Irina Gorin has a really cute method, and she has a monster hand. And anytime her students distort their hand, she calls it, "Oh, the monster came to piano lessons." And it's kind of cute, but just, yeah, engaged knuckles, I think. And we don't want them to collapse. And when my students do that, I try to be like really silly about it and like try to like, oh no, look what happened. And try to help them see what's going on there rather than just like, oh, curve your fingers, because then that can result in that like kind of a claw shape.
Let's talk a little bit about scales and technique, Hannon, turning, all of those things. Sometimes when we talk about technique, that's the first thing that comes to people's minds is, oh, I should play my scales every day. I should play some Hannon. Do you use those exercises, and how do you use them to, I guess, teach great technique?
Yeah. So I think what part of we need to think about technique is how we're playing piano, the manner we're playing the piano, as opposed to technique is scales. Because a lot of people do say that, but you can play a scale with really poor technique.
Yes, you can. I've done it.
But scale is absolutely valuable. Hannon, Czerny are also valuable. I actually kind of went through a phase where I didn't like Hannon. I was like, ugh, Hannon, so boring. But when I was getting my doctorate, my teacher made me play Hannon because I came to my doctorate kind of still in this phase of trying to overcome injury. And I told her, like, on day one, I said, this is my main goal. Like, I don't even care about playing repertoire. Like, I just want this to go away. So I studied with Heidi Louise Williams, so I have to credit her with this. But I went through the entire Hannon, and I turned on a metronome, and I played with it in quarters, and then in eighths, and in sixteenths, and really focused on my wrist motion. And I think I might have even started out hands separately, like really basic, but just going through it, because you want to get your wrists engaged and kind of synchronized in when playing something like that. And it was evening out my tone, getting all my fingers kind of focused in. And it really I think it made a big difference in my playing, just going through it like that. Now, again, like I was really focused in on what are my wrists doing? What are my fingers doing? And going at it from that angle. And also with scales, she had me work through playing scales like with a metronome and quarters, eighths, sixths, or in triplets, 16ths. And that, I think, was, it seemed so basic, but again, as pianists, sometimes we want to play fun stuff. So we're like, I'll play a couple scales, whatever. I'm going to move on to Chopin now. But it really sets a healthy foundation for playing. So definitely for the advanced student, I recommend having a warm-up routine is really essential.
Yeah. Can you talk a little more about that? Like, why is that important and what do you recommend?
Yeah. So warming up. So that's something I've learned. So athletes always warm up, and pianists or other musicians, we do not always warm up. And our vocalist friends are a little bit better at this because if they're, they warm up their vocal folds so they can sing well. And our muscles in our arms and hands need to be warmed up also. We don't need to start out playing our fastest repertoire, especially when it is cold outside, like it is winter right now. And if you have just come in from outdoors, you need to physically warm up your body. Like whether it's starting off with running your arms and hands maybe under hot water or using hot hands. Like I haven't been doing it so much now, but previously when I was playing a lot and dealing with an injury, I was buying them in bulk and I was, using them like daily, but to keep my arms warm and then stretching, playing slowly, gradually, playing faster. And then once, it doesn't have to be that long. It can be a 15-minute routine, then your body is better prepared to play your repertoire. And ideally, you will play it better and avoid hurting yourself.
Yes, it's amazing. Like warming up, just getting your brain in gear and reminding your fingers where they're supposed to be on the keys. It does make a really big difference. And I am a guilty pianist who does not always warm up. And I need to do better with that. So thank you for the reminder. Do you have any final thoughts about technique, teaching technique, anything else that we haven't maybe touched on that you'd like to share?
Well, one other thing, I didn't mention this earlier, but it relates to what we're talking about, was when we were talking about the fingers, and you mentioned flat fingers, which is obviously an issue, but the hand shape and having the hand bridge engaged. That is something else I feel like we don't always talk about. We talk about round hand shape or some hand position or something, but what's really important is to have that bridge engaged. When it's, collapsed, that's when we find a lot of issue there. And so that goes back to saying round hand or curved fingers. Sometimes that distorts the hand bridge also. So I actually teach the hand bridge and even having it a little slightly higher than the wrist, which is a little bit different than what some people might advocate for. But again, when we look at just our natural shape, like dropping the hand by its side and bringing it up, it does kind of make a little bit of a arch, like a pyramid type shape. And so that's usually the shape I focus on with students and talk about the bridge. And I might even say things like, oh, you don't want to drive on a bridge that's collapsed. And of course they're like, oh no, that would be terrible. So I said, we don't play the piano with collapsed bridge. And that they usually catch on to that.
Yeah, for sure. That's a good analogy there. Well, Stephanie, this has been so informative for me. I've learned a lot, and I know that our listeners will have learned a lot as well. I really appreciate you being here and sharing your expertise with us. If listeners have any questions or want to get in touch with you, is there a way that they could do that?
Yeah, sure. They can go to my website, stephaniearcherpiano.com. There's like a little contact me blurb that they could fill out, and I get that in an email. I'm on Instagram. It's Stephanie the Piano Teacher, so they can find me there as well. But I'm always happy to answer any questions. So
great. Well, thank you so much, Stephanie. This was really enjoyable, and I loved meeting you today.
Yes, I had so much fun. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Stephanie about technique. She had so many great reminders for us, and she was able to put some of these abstract ideas about technique into more concrete terms for us. I don't know about you, but sometimes even when I know what I want from my students in terms of technique, it can be hard to describe it or know how to get them to implement it without saying, the phrases like curved fingers that my teachers used back in the day. So there was so much for me to think about from this episode. I hope you enjoyed it as well. That's the end of the show for this week, but I hope to see you back here again next week. And if you enjoy this podcast, it would mean so much if you could rate and review the show on whatever podcast service you are listening to it on. I'm Rachel Aaron, and you've been listening to the Top Music Piano Podcast. I'll talk to you next week.
How do you keep up to date with all the latest trends and research into music education? How do you connect with other teachers around the world and make sure your teaching stays fresh and relevant for students of all ages and stages, both now and into the future? I created our Top Music Pro membership to be the one-stop shop for music teaching resources, training, support and community, and I'd love for you to come and join us inside. With over 40 comprehensive training courses, hundreds of teaching demonstrations and lesson plans, free monthly sheet music, discounts, and all the business and pedagogy support you could ever need, Top Music Pro is the community you've been looking for. If you're ready to level up your learning from the podcast and join thousands of other teachers in our global network, head over to topmusicpro.com today.